Forbes, welcome back to Mexico. It's great to have you back.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Steve, when I had the opportunity to interview you exactly a year ago, what surprised me of that interview is that you were so gung-ho about Mexico. You were so excited about everything that was going on, and you were particularly excited and interested in all the reforms that were about to take place. Well, it happened. A year later, there are 6 very important reforms that Mexico is now trying to implement. What is your general reaction in terms of these reforms?
Well, I think the key is, of course, now making them happen, and everyone's most focused, certainly outside of Mexico, on what's going to happen on the energy side. Mm-hmm. As you know, they've sealed off certain portions of the fields here for Pemex and opened up certain others that outside investors can be involved in. The implementation of that's going to be critical, as with these other reforms. The one area of reform that I was concerned about a year ago, of course, was on the tax side. Mm-hmm. I think that was going in the wrong direction. But these other reforms, I think, if anything, need to be have a sense of urgency about implementing them sooner rather than later. You're never going to get everything perfect the first time. Mm-hmm. And then think about seriously about deepening them. Mm-hmm. And making sure that in telecom, put up the spectrum up for auction. Mm-hmm. In electricity, more competition there. Mm-hmm. Areas where you can get, instead of saying we've achieved these great things, push to do even more. And then make the changes on the tax side, and then I think Mexico will be on the way. The government, for example, is trying to reduce the size of the informal economy, which is very large. And I think one of the things they have to give very serious consideration to in that respect is very serious tax reform, especially on payroll taxes, and making it easy to start a new business. You're not going to do it through enforcement, you're going to do it through enticement.
Well, let me ask you this, because clearly President Enrique Peña Nieto his popularity has risen outside of Mexico. He's perceived to be an extraordinary leader with very good political skills, where he was able to get all the parties to sit down and agree on these very controversial reforms. But here in Mexico, his popularity, at least when you look at the polls, is surprisingly low. And there could be different explanations for this, but I mean, how does a president deal with the fact that the reforms are out there on the table? It's going to take years for them to be implemented, but the question mark is, how does he translate these reforms into credibility?
Well, first on the reforms, a great sense of urgency. It was a miracle, political miracle, to get 3 parties to agree on anything. Previous presidents.
President Barack Obama would love to have that.
No, President Barack Obama says this is it, and no negotiation.
Right. He doesn't negotiate.
Yeah, your president is willing to negotiate and have people sit around a table and come to an agreement, which is how you get things done. So getting those things done, especially in the energy area, to outsiders was absolutely remarkable. Mm-hmm. We all saw a year ago the huge strikes and demonstrations by teachers. And when he proposed his what we think would be basic education reforms. Mm-hmm. But the reason why his popularity is low is, while there's been a lot of obviously attention on reforms, particularly in energy, the Mexican economy is stalled. There's been very little growth in the last 6 quarters. Mm-hmm. And so people are wondering, a lot of headlines, but where does it translate into salaries? Where does it translate into new jobs? So that's what's hurting them, is not the reforms themselves, but people want to see action on the economy, the immediate economy now, not 5 years from now.
Well, let's talk about growth. I mean, I think this is a huge dilemma for the Mexican president, for the Secretary of Finance, for the Mexican business community. How will Mexico grow in the short term? And it just doesn't seem possible.
I think growth is possible. Mexico, given its state of development, should be growing faster than the U.S. Our economy is still sluggish because of mistakes we've made in our policies. So we're growing a little above 2%, which means Mexico should easily do 4%, 5%, and plus all the free trade agreements you have around the world. Just give you one example of one area that you've had growth in is in the auto industry.
Right.
You're about to surpass Brazil in terms of auto manufacturing, which is an extraordinary achievement. By 2020, if projections are right, you'll be the 6th largest auto manufacturer in the world, certainly the largest outside of North America. And so there's enormous opportunities here. And I think this is where the government has to focus on in terms of taxation, instead of looking at revenues as a percent of GDP, which to me is a meaningless number. The key is, do you have a vibrant economy? So instead of raising rates or putting off promised tax cuts as they did on the corporate tax side, they should be going in the opposite direction. Throw the spreadsheets away and go for a radical tax simplification. The other thing, reducing the VAT instead of raising it in the border states.
Right.
And reducing the burdens on small businesses. I mean, it's amazing to me, the government estimates that 25% of your economy is informal, that 59%.
I think it's larger, yeah.
Well, that's the government estimate. Yeah. So yes, you'd raise it, but their estimate that 59% of the workforce is in the informal economy is astonishing. So that's how you raise revenue, is how you bring the informal economy into the formal economy. And that means deregulation, radical tax simplification, and make it easy to set up a legal business, and you'll get revenue growth through reducing rates rather than raising rates.
Let me bring back to some comments you made a year ago. You were very critical of the Mexico's decision to raise taxes, and there already a year ago the debate had taken place, and it was quite clear that Mexico's business, in fact, everybody were going to be paying more taxes. And you were extremely critical of this decision by the Secretary of Finance, Luis Videgaray. But let me just kind of put back on the table what he's arguing and what the Mexican government's arguing. Is Mexican business community does not like to pay taxes. I mean, and the tax base is extremely low. And at the end of the day, you have to have almost what they call terrorism tactics to make sure that the business community pays their part of the burden. You earn more money, you pay more taxes. It's kind of this justice argument. I mean, what's your reaction? I mean, you were very critical last year, and that continues to be the arguments presented by the Mexican community, by the Mexican business.
You can go the way of Greece. The Greeks don't like to pay taxes, probably less than Mexicans do. And the Greek government has applied a whole bunch of new taxes, and the economy is still mired in deep recession. It's showing little signs of growth, but you need a microscope to find it. And they've had a deep, deep recession. Neighboring states such as Albania and Bulgaria put in simple flat taxes, and while those economies are struggling because the European economy is struggling, they're doing far better than Greece. So if you want to expand tax revenues, you don't raise tax rates and try to hit those who can't avoid you. What you try to do is figure out, how do you get that large informal economy into the formal economy? So you start collecting taxes from them.
How do you do that?
You don't do it through coercion. If it doesn't work, people always find ways around it. They've been practicing this for generations. So the way you do it is radical tax simplification. Mexico already has somewhat low rates, but instead of raising your top income tax rate to 35%, put in a flat tax, generous exemptions for adults and for children, but cut the rate down to 15%. And that way, for most people who make decent income, paying 10 or 15% is not worth getting in trouble with the tax authorities. Your payroll taxes are very high, so very high, so people don't pay them. Radically cut them. So in other words, make it enticing. And then in terms of business taxes, not only cut your 30% rate down to, say, what Ireland has, 12 or 15%, but also have a high threshold so that small businesses, the man who shines shoes, people who do the informal part of the economy, don't fear they're going to have to pay taxes where they didn't pay before. So you don't pay the corporate tax unless you make the equivalent of, say, say 500,000 pesos or something like that. Now the finance ministry will go berserk when you tell them.
Right.
They'll say, oh, we'll lose revenue.
Right.
No, you won't. You expand the tax base, not through raising taxes, but by simplifying it and making them so low that it's not worth for people to get around them. Then on starting a business, Mexico's made some improvements, but you still have 6 processes you have to go through to start a legal business. Do what New Zealand does. One blip on a computer, done. In terms of registering property, the World Bank finds that Mexico is one of the worst in the world. You rank 150th. 7 different complicated procedures and certifications. You paid your water bill and all that kind of stuff. Radically simplify that. In other words, take the World Bank survey called Doing Business. Look around the world where the best practices are, like New Zealand, or a simple registration of property, and bring it here. And when you cut out all the rigmarole, then when businesses are started, they will be formal. And the nice thing about that is, with low rates, businesses feel they can grow and not get punished for success.
Well,
by the way, these lessons need to be learned by my country too.
well, let me ask you, another issue that was raised since the last time we spoke had to do with inequality. You know, since we had the opportunity to talk a year ago, Capitalism, this book, was published in Europe and of course was read and commented in the United States. And it was commented and read very carefully here in Mexico because when
Too bad.
Well, let me ask you that. I mean, there is an issue there of inequality, and that a lot of these tax policies, a lot of these development policies are all related to this issue. There's such a difference, just an abysmal difference in terms of the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor, both in the United States and Mexico. And this is a huge debate, and it's a huge debate in the United States, and it's a huge debate in Mexico. How do you solve that?
Well, you don't solve it by slowing down your economy. You solve it by doing just the opposite. You want to rev up the economy. People don't mind somebody, at least in my country, earning more as long as they have a chance to get a good job, get more skills, and earn more, that they're moving up the ladder. And the way you achieve that is through radical tax simplification. It's counterintuitive, but it works where it's done. Having a stable peso, that's going to be an issue in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
They've got to just fix it to the dollar and not make the mistakes they made in 1994 and numerous devaluations in the past. That just sets back your middle class. And when you have and in terms of education, you've started on education reform where people can start to get skills. But the key thing is, if you have a vibrant economy, employers will train people because they need to hire the labor. And since Mexico is now very competitive with countries like China, there's enormous opportunity there. You do have those 44 free trade agreements, more than we have. So that's why sometimes people put auto manufacturing in Mexico, because if you sell from Mexico, you have more markets that you can go into than we can from the United States. So you have advantages. So instead of figuring out how to crush people who make money, and figure out how you have an economy where more people can get jobs and earn money.
Oh, I'm sure those businessmen and businesswomen who are listening to this interview are going to love you for those comments, because I think there has been, many of these reforms have been perceived by the business community as being it's created almost an antagonistic relationship with the federal government. They're extremely angry.
And then in terms of more reforms, on the banking side, right now banks do very well lending to governments, local governments and the federal government. Right. Instead of taking a risk on small businesses. But if you simplify the starting of a business, you remove barriers to setting up financial institutions, you'll find, as you're starting to see a little bit in China where they allow it, the rise of institutions that will go in the business of financing small businesses. One of the great strengths of the United States is the depth and the multiplicity of our capital markets that meet every need, from the small business person to the giant corporations, and that's what you need to start to develop here.
Well, Another issue that's being debated in the United States, and it's being debated here in Mexico, and I'm sure it's going to make your pressure rise, has to do with minimum wage. There has been a very interesting debate which has gone much farther, and it could have a potential impact in terms of should the Mexican government, by decree, increase in a substantial way minimum wage. This is a debate that's taking place in the United States. Barack Obama has proposed it, at least for federal government workers. And it really comes down, once again, Steve, to this issue of social justice. You cannot have people trying to live daily. I mean, minimum wage, you can't live off of minimum wage, neither in the United States or in Mexico.
Yeah, social justice is not served by impoverishing an economy or having an economy like Mexico's, which has enormous potential, growing at less than 2% a year. That is social injustice. And putting in policies that make it hard for this economy to get off the ground. I mean, your electricity rates, you've made some reforms, are still higher than what we pay in the United States of America. And we're a much richer country. So there's room for more reform. But you don't decree higher wages. If you can pass the minimum wage, and what you'll do is destroy jobs, especially those who have the least skills. You'll increase the informal economy. What's the social justice of that? When we do it in the United States, and you can see it over time, that those with the least are hurt the most. Compare, for example, let's look at Europe. Until recently, Germany had no minimum wage. Their youthful unemployment rate was 8%. France has a high minimum wage. Their youthful unemployment is 24%. My country, 18 to 20% youthful unemployment. We raise the rate, I guarantee it's going to go up. Spain is horrific, 50% youthful unemployment. So if you could pass laws saying, let's create prosperity, we'd have done it centuries ago. But you got to establish a base where people create more things.
But isn't this kind of a vicious circle? I mean,
no, there's no vicious circle. The only vicious circle is government barriers to progress.
You trust the free market.
I trust people to want to better their lives.
And you trust the government to do the right thing.
I trust that governments eventually will be under pressure to where they remove the barriers to people wanting to improve their lot in life.
What are we not doing in Mexico? I mean, you gave a couple of suggestions of other things that Mexico should be doing, but I mean, what should Mexico be doing right now that Mexico's not doing?
Well, right now they should be looking at that so-called fiscal reform they did.
So you don't like that tax reform?
Well, it stands in the way of the economy. So get rid of it. In fact, go in the opposite direction. Do real reform. Simplify, reduce tax rates, radically reduce them, so people feel liberated.
But then they're not going to pay taxes, Steve.
Of course they do. When you have a vibrant economy, that's the only... Remember, governments don't create resources. People create resources. Buying and selling, trading each day, whether it's making food or anything, or automobiles. People create resources. And if you recognize that, then it becomes very simple. What stands in the way of people creating resources? And when you create resources, government revenues go up. They have this static mentality that if you lower a rate, you lose. They don't understand balance sheets, that when you raise the asset value, people create more. People start more businesses. The wealth of the nation goes up.
Well,
look at the people who do things in my country. There's a woman named Elizabeth Holmes who's come up with a device to do blood tests that you barely feel a prick, and you can do a whole array of testing instead of all of going in your veins and things like that. She was a dropout from Stanford. She just turned 30 and she's a billionaire. You look at Larry Ellison, who just announced his retirement, orphan. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard. Steve Jobs famously...
It sounds like you're encouraging people not to finish their university degree.
The reason that these people had a chance to do well is we had an environment in the United States where they could tap in and go do things. No reason why Mexico can't do it. You've got plenty of entrepreneurial energy here. You've just been suppressing it.
Dr. Luis Videgaray, I hope you are watching this interview. Well, what else? Okay, Mexico needs to lower taxes. What about creating incentives? You don't lower taxes, you create incentives.
Incentives is a political process. You're
is.
picking winners and who gets it and who doesn't. Development banks, the government's talking about development banks.
Yes.
Oh no.
You don't like
But
development banks?
it's politicized. It's politicized. Let people go into banking. Let banks expand. And as businesses rise up, as you make it easier, people will figure out how to service their new needs. Again, this top-down attitude, if we don't do it, it won't be done. No, you get out of the way and people will figure out how to do it, and they'll come from areas of society that you never would have suspected there was that talent there.
So what is the president going to do? He clearly, I mean, I'm sure they're looking at his popularity rate, and there needs to be a way of convincing Mexicans that this is that we are on the right track. What should he be doing that he's not doing that, in addition to cutting taxes?
Well, figure out how it's unnatural that your economy is not growing.
I know.
And so why isn't it? It's not, it's these fiscal and regulatory barriers. If he could change after, what, 3/4 of a century, energy laws in this country, he certainly has the capacity to change something as simple as tax laws in terms of a major reform. And when you start to do that, lower the VAT, so people start to see lower prices again, then they'll say, oh, something is happening. They'll start to, you can make these things immediate.
You know, we had Governor Jerry Brown.
And the other thing, don't let the peso go down again.
You know, and that's going to be difficult.
And I'll be glad to talk to the head of the Bank of Mexico on how you do that. Because you've got plenty of reserves to defend.
Well, and it is.
peso.
I mean, there's a big concern that a lot of cash is going to be flowing out of Mexico once the U.S. economy starts. Once the Feds in the United States start injecting so much that U.S. interest starts going up, and
Right.
there is a huge concern that's going to happen. It could happen from one day to another. I mean, there is that possibility, Steve.
Well, that's all the more reason to learn how you defend your currency, which most countries don't know how to do. And the way to do it is very basic. You buy pesos in the market with your reserves and don't re-release the pesos in the domestic economy, and you will beat the speculators very easily. Mexico's the means to do it. They didn't have the knowledge to do it.
What can we expect from the U.S. economy for next year? I mean, I look at the numbers. Sometimes, they seem to be very positive. I mean, in terms of unemployment in the United States has gone down. I mean, there's a sense that the U.S. economy is growing, but there seems to be this nervousness that at any point this could stop. I mean, what's your sense? What's going to happen next year?
Well, I think barring a foreign crisis, which is
possible.
U.S. mistakes have created a global environment for bad stuff to happen. That's another subject for another time. But barring a disaster in Europe or in Asia, the U.S. economy should grow next year probably 2.5–3%. This is a poor recovery. We're just finishing our baseball season. It's like a batter who should be hitting 350 and we're still hitting 240, 250. We're not really into it. And because of policy mistakes we've made. It's not only Mexico that makes fiscal mistakes. We've been making even more in my country.
Well, taxes are good. It supports
Taxes
your
are
poverty programs.
What?
It supports your poverty programs.
Poverty programs keep people in poverty. Prosperity pulls people out of poverty.
Well, what's going to happen next year? I mean, and the reason why I'm asking you is this, of course, we're following it very closely because it has a direct impact on Mexico's economy.
80% of your exports come to the United States.
So what else is going to happen? I mean, what should we be watching here in Mexico? Of course, we're watching very closely every time the Fed speaks, see what's going to happen with interest rates. What else should we be looking for?
Well, it would be nice if our central bank allowed credit markets to establish normalcy in the United States, which they've suppressed for 6 years.
And you think that was a mistake?
A huge mistake.
Maintain interest rate down? Inflation's been under control?
Well, when you crush the price of money, it's like the old Soviet Union. They had a sardonic saying, health care is free, but you can't get any. Credit for new and small businesses has been very restrictive in my country, and that is highly abnormal because of bank regulations and what the Federal Reserve did in terms of sucking all the cash out of the banking system to finance federal deficits. So the Fed has done an immense amount of harm, and the more they allow a normal market to operate, the quicker, the faster we will grow. But they've made mistakes. ECB, the European Central Bank, not quite as bad as we've done. Japan's about to do what we did, so they're continuing to make mistakes. So Mexico should look at what our new Congress does. Will the new Congress, will our president finally negotiate the way your president did in an honest way with in this case, you don't have to deal with one party or two. He doesn't like to even deal with his own party. So deal with the two parties and come up with some reforms. They could pass. We could pass simplification of our very high corporate tax rates. We could probably get the beginnings of an immigration bill. We get a few other things done. But so watch the elections and watch if our president is willing to negotiate.
Steve Forbes, thank you again. Welcome back to Mexico. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.